Government is yet to gazette new COVID-19 restrictions despite the current draft regulations lapsing at midnight. The Health Department says it will announce the way forward in due course. Meanwhile, the DA is calling for clarity as soon as possible as numbers continue to rise. Medical expert and convener at the Progressive Health Forum, Dr. Aslam Dasu, joins us now live to unpack this situation. Dr. Dasu, appreciate your time as always. So the Health Department is trying to reassure the public that there is nothing to worry about. It's all under control. Yet we don't have a way forward when it comes to the regulations.
Good evening, Shahan, and good evening to your viewers. Yes, I think you're correct. We don't really know what's going to happen. Unfortunately, I think the government has fashioned a rod for its own back with these regulations, which are just zombie pieces of legislation arising from the Disaster Management Act, transplanted and put under the National Health Act, wholly inconsistent with what we know of the pandemic, with what we know of how to deal with it, and with what we know about what works and what doesn't work. So it's a remarkable situation that we are now at 1 minute to midnight, in a manner of speaking, on finding out whether the government put those regulations in or published those drafts just as a stopgap while it considered more rational, consistent regulations, which will all surprise us with tomorrow, pleasantly so, and give us regulations that are consistent with how we can manage the pandemic going into the future. I'm not very optimistic that that's the case, but that's going by past experience. And one always has to have some hope that there's going to be some rational behavior by the government, given that the facts are known. This is all scientific, and so we sit here and wait in a state of unease about what might happen. I can tell you this: if these draft regulations are published as they are, they will not withstand legal scrutiny, given the number of cases that have come up against it and the preponderance of opinion that they do not, and won't have constitutional muster.
Yeah, definitely the case, right? And it's interesting that they couldn't get their act together, given that they gave themselves a month to actually make sure that the draft regulations would end and whatever they decide going forward would be announced. What, in your opinion, is the rational way forward?
Well, I think if you take it from an opposite end, there was a piece published in the Daily Maverick, 22nd of March, by our premier scientist, which was a devastating critique of this set of drafts that would not get us anywhere. And I think they went through the important and elementary aspects of what we need to regulate this national health emergency. It is correct that the National Health Act be the operating legislation, because this is a public health emergency, not the state of disaster, which is not designed to manage a multi-year pandemic. However, like you say, I'm not sure what they have been doing all these months. It was late last year where even the government conceded that the state of disaster was inappropriate to manage the pandemic further. The president said so in January. And this is the business of the government, to draft proper regulation. So I can't answer the question. I'm in a state of a bit of despair here, and hoping against hope that a miracle of sorts occurs tomorrow, and that we have a set of regulations that we can work with, that are appropriate to the conditions we face, and that will manage the pandemic with the knowledge we have of it after 2.5 years.
Yeah, I know that you've answered this question on the show previously, but as the regulations come to an end technically at midnight, I think many South Africans are going to wake up and leave their masks at home. We know the current transitional regulations say that you should wear it indoors. What's your opinion on that now?
Well, again, I think South Africans should now depend less on the overarching hand of regulation to govern the behavior with regard to this pandemic. We know what it's about. we are all pandemic veterans. We know what to do, what not to do. We understand that the measures that work is masking, is avoiding poorly ventilated indoor spaces. We know that works. We also know that vaccinations prevent severe disease. We know that works too. And I think that it's incumbent on us now to protect ourselves from this illness. You can't expect regulations to do that. And as we can see, even when they try, they don't do that very well. So I would urge everyone now to take a view about whether they want to be exposed to this virus, which is showing a surge now and which will definitely make you ill, and which may, even if you don't get severely ill, put you at great risk of long COVID. Why would you want that? Certainly we know what to do, so let's go ahead and do it. The regulations, however, are important insofar as, requiring a mask mandate in conditions where people are just not obliging on that score. So one would require regulations which gives the government proper legislative capability to ensure that the public is as safe as possible during this time. Certainly not these regulations. And a great measure of self-responsibility now emerges. We are moving into a different phase of the pandemic. We will probably pivot out of the emergency phase this year, and we're going to have to live with this virus as it surges every so often, and just prevent ourselves from getting very ill by taking your vaccination.
Yeah, I just took my booster today. Just in terms of the current numbers, the infection rate, the number of hospitalizations, what's your reading into that? Because we had the KwaZulu-Natal Health MEC this week telling independent newspapers, I saw, that she was concerned about the number of hospitalizations given the issues in KwaZulu-Natal after the flooding. What's your take on that?
Yes, I think the situation in KZN may be a little bit blurred at the moment, given the recent disaster there. But overall, the number of hospitalizations we've seen is consistent so far with what we saw during the first Omicron wave. Given that this surge seems to be driven by subvariants of that variant, we're not expecting things to be much different. But there's no way of telling that definitively at this point. The Minister of Health mentioned yesterday, and I think he's correct, that we still need to give it another week to 10 days to get a clearer picture of the virulence of this subvariant, of these subvariants. But the convergence of opinion, scientific opinion, is that we will see hospitalizations increase as the number of cases increase, but that will be simply consistent with what we've had in the past. We don't expect the deluge of the health facilities that we saw during Delta. But to be definitive about that, we need the data, and that will probably only come together in about 10 days.
All right. Thank you so much for your input. Appreciate it. Dr. Aslam Dasu, medical expert and convener at the Progressive Health Forum.